During a training session, a certain officer of the British intelligence service asked his new agents a question. Which enemy is the most dangerous one? Finally responding to their questioning looks, he said, "The most dangerous enemy is the one who you don't know, who you don't even know exists." Vladimir himself experienced how truthful this statement is. The enemy raised his hand against him literally. At that time, Vladimir had no idea that it was his own life at stake.
I'm not from Prague originally, so from time to time I get on the train and I go to my hometown for a visit. A couple of years ago I moved to Prague to find a job and to see whether fortune would smile on me, so to speak. I was brought up in a communist country in the 80s. In those times, atheism was widely taught in schools. I remember very well being taught again and again that there were two worldviews, an idealistic worldview and the Marx-Leninist worldview. We had been exposed to Marxism-Leninism for years. Atheism was a natural part of our daily lives. Therefore, for a certain period of time, I believed that there was no God.
The year 1989 brought significant political, economic, and social changes. What changed in your life?
September was a key moment for me that year. A friend of mine, a recent conscript, organized a Gap Fest, a kind of informal gathering. The police barged in and put us all under arrest, even though the entire event had been officially organized by the Socialist Youth Union. During his military service, that friend of mine, the conscript, met another friend who was practicing psychotronics. After he returned home from his military service, he showed me some of his new psychotronic skills, such as divining with the sidereal pendulum. He placed the pendulum right above my palm and asked questions. The pendulum responded. I was stunned and fascinated and made a decision to learn more.
At that time, were you aware that you had got in touch with powers which were not advisable to dabble in?
No, not in the least. I thought it was just another very interesting thing made available to me in this world. I had absolutely no idea of the consequences that I would later experience in my life, or that my life itself would be threatened by those powers. Back then, I was very surprised that a spiritual world even existed and that there was something between heaven and earth which I knew nothing about. When the sidereal pendulum responded to my friend's questions, the answers were true. But they were about my private life. I found out that there was another world, a spiritual world, which was very real. However, I had no idea it was very dangerous.
Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell.
Can you tell me about how you started practicing meditation?
I was about 19 years old when I started practicing meditation. Each time I lay on my bed and tried to completely relax with no tension or stress. During these sessions, I would play cassette tapes with esoteric music. Next to my head, I always placed an amethyst, the semi-precious stone. The teachings promise that this stone helps you to open chakras, energy points of the non-physical body. Gradually, I felt more and more relaxed. I felt warmth and a bit of tingling. I felt that some strange power was pervading me. During my first meditations, I often felt sleepy, and sometimes I actually slept. Later, my mind somehow switched to a new mode. I stopped falling asleep and instead starting falling into a semi-trance. I had been practicing all this for about 2 years. Gradually, I felt worse and worse. Meditation promises you will feel better and better. I experienced the exact opposite. I cannot confirm those experiences published by various authors.
So you find Oriental meditation questionable and dangerous?
Absolutely. Based upon my experiences, I'm steadfastly convinced so. Through Oriental meditation, you expose yourself to the powers of Satan. Very often, two terms are used mistakenly, relaxation and meditation. Relaxation brings rest and relief. Meditation, on the other hand, is a state of self-immersion. The New Age teachings, as well as Buddhism, encourage you to seek God inside of you, focusing fully on our mind, our insight, our higher self. All this stands in direct contradiction with the teachings of the Bible and Christianity. Jesus says, "Turn your eyes upon me." Buddhists teach the opposite. Turn to your own self. This is a very destructive teaching, self-destructive, I should say. It is a very dangerous world which is not advisable to dabble in.
So you came into contact with occult powers. In his book, A Trip into the Supernatural, Roger Monod openly testifies how many people led or inspired by occult powers have made huge fortunes and achieved fame. What is your opinion?
My primary motivation to learn more about supernatural powers was not just my amazement at the mysteries of psychotronics and occultism. I liked the idea of having an opportunity to being able to have control over certain people through telepathy and to eliminate those who caused problems in my life. That's why I made a decision to learn as much as possible about these powers and to get the relevant skills and abilities. To me, psychotronics was a starting point. I also studied the Satanic Bible, where I found more techniques needed to eliminate my enemies. The day came when I tried to use some of them in practice. Using the techniques described in the Satanic Bible, I put a curse upon a woman who had been very hostile to me at work and caused me many problems. Soon afterward, a machine in the factory where we worked cut the fingers off her hand. These powers are very real and very dangerous.
So they do really work.
There's a saying, each coin has two sides. Those esoteric teachings promise a certain sense of exceptionality and power. Very soon, however, you end up falling under the control of those very same powers and cannot free yourself without the divine intervention of Jesus Christ. I experienced this in my own life. I wanted more and more power, so I devoted myself fully to meditations and esotericism. As I already mentioned, I succeeded in getting a semi-precious stone, an amethyst from Morocco. I had been using it for opening chakras, as Hindus teach. They say that every person is equipped with 7 basic channels of energy. If you succeed in opening these channels through meditations, you can reach the well-known nirvana of liberation. That's what they promise. Once you are filled with those powers, you can envision something and receive it. Moreover, you can travel astrally, you can heal people, you can elevate during meditation, and so on. I was eager to be able to do all these things. During my meditations, I felt very well. However, when listening to the esoteric music, I realized that step by step my mind was being filled by something I could not describe. I felt tingly every time. In the end, my situation became critical, although I wasn't aware of it at that time. It's like a drug abuser taking pills every day or an alcoholic drinking. Both think they are in control of their situation, but they are not. Very soon I realized that those evil powers were in control of me. And at that moment, I understood it was a life-threatening situation. I suffered from depression, social phobia, anxiety, etc. I felt like my life was in real danger.
At that time, did you think that your life was over and that there was no way out?
Absolutely. I fell into an even deeper depression, and I sensed that a strange power was in control of me. I knew that I was not able to help myself or to fight that power. It is very difficult to describe the situation I was in back then. I was completely exhausted. I felt like someone was sucking the energy out of me with a straw. I felt weaker and weaker. In those difficult days, I thought about death very often.
And then one day you noticed a poster.
That's right. I was walking by a hospital building, and on the poster it read, "I used to be a healer, psychotronics in a new light." I felt really miserable. I hopped to the meeting, or more accurately, I crawled. During the presentation, I heard the testimony of a man who experienced exactly the same things that I had. That was the real breaking point in my understanding. I realized that it was not a kind of an impersonal power that had taken control over me. It was not something, but someone. The speaker used the example of two people, one who uses a dowsing rod and another who uses a pendulum. Both search for water. How is it possible that two completely different instruments do the same job? There must be an intelligent being behind that, a being able to make calculations leading to the same result. The bottom line is that Satan is not a power. He is a real creature.
Do you remember your feelings when you realized that occultism is one big lie and deception?
Two things came to my mind. First was shock, and second was fear. I realized that only Jesus Christ could help me and save me. I left the presentation and I was walking down the street when I experienced something very unusual and unpleasant. It was not something that could be explained so easily like an asthma attack or a seizure. Literally, it was like somebody grabbed my throat and started strangling me.
After this experience, which just hearing about it makes my hair stand on edge, you came to the point when you realized that this wasn't a game anymore.
Well, after this terrible experience, I really did realize again that my situation was very serious. I arrived home absolutely devastated and desolate. I sat on my sofa just like I used to do when I would meditate. I took the typical lotus position, Buddhist stake, and I prayed earnestly, "Lord Jesus Christ, please save me from Satan." It was really something horrible. I remember that I still had dowsing rods and pendulums hanging all on the walls around me, as they had been a part of my life for such a long time.
According to the testimonies of other people, you're not the only person who has experienced a direct assault when you made the decision to follow Jesus Christ. Were you afraid for your life back then?
Very much so. I realized that reincarnation was a fallacy. Until then, I believed that my soul would reincarnate every time my physical body passed away. I found out that the Bible teaches something vastly different. I learned that we are living in the middle of war between God and Satan. The good news, however, is that in this war, we can depend on a power described in the Bible. In 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19, we find a story about the Assyrian king Sennacherib besieging Jerusalem. The Israelites were in a hopeless situation. God did something, however. Let's read the original text in Hebrew.
Hebrejský originál říká velice pak zajímavé věci, které přeložím. A ten text zní: Vajehi balayla, hahu vajece malach Hashem, vayat bachane ashur meashemone vachamisha alef, vayishkem vaboker vahine kulan pagari metim.
The text says, "It happened in the night. The angel of the Lord went out and killed by a sword, piercing all those in the Assyrian camp. 185,000 soldiers died. When the people got up the next morning, they shouted, 'What happened here?' We find here these words, Pegarim metim, which means they were completely dead. One angel eliminated the entire Assyrian army in a very unusual way. You see, this is great news. The good news of the gospel is that we are not left alone in the war with evil, with Satan. Since then, to this very day, I rely on the Lord's infinite power. I remember how I started writing a prayer diary as a young pastor. At that time, Vladimir came to me and asked for prayers. Not just mine, but from the whole congregation. Prayers that God would prepare him for baptism and that the Holy Spirit would lead him in a way that he could give his heart to the Lord. For about 9 months, we had been praying for him on a regular basis. It's good to know that God hears all of our prayers. In the end, I was able to baptize several people, the last one being Vladimir.
I met Vladimir in one of the congregations in Prague, and we started talking about the Hebrew language. I mentioned I liked this extraordinary language. Vlad responded immediately, and in a few moments, we arranged the time and date of our first Hebrew lesson. We studied Hebrew on a regular basis for several months. It has been a special experience and inspiration for my life. Vlad is a person who has a great sense of humor and is full of optimism. He places his trust and his faith in a very reliable source. He's not afraid of sharing this trust and faith with others. I respect him, above all, because he is willing to share his knowledge, experiences, and faith. That is really great.
I'm not a very outgoing person. Vladimir approached me back then and said, "Well, this church celebration is great, but we should give thanks for all the food and beverages we have here." I replied, "Okay, let's give thanks." And he was like, "And may I say it in Hebrew? It would make me very happy." So he prayed the Thanksgiving prayer in Hebrew. I became very interested and said, "Would you teach me something? Would you teach me and help me be able to understand more?" Vlad is very enthusiastic, so he started giving me Hebrew lessons.
A to bylo to nejkrásnější, že on je opravdový nadšenec do věci a tak mě začal učit.
My journey to the Lord Jesus was not easy. I had been studying the Bible very carefully for 3 years. It has been an arduous but also joyful journey. People often ask the question, who has the truth? They should ask instead, what is truth? In this context, Jesus gives us an amazing promise and says,
Gnosis tche, ten ale tchean, kai he ale tcheia, eleyut cherosei himas.
"You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Vlad is an extraordinary person. In many ways, I cannot compare to him, because in contrast to him, I am lazy. Each week, he spends many hours visiting various second-hand bookshops where he buys lots of books. He gives many of them as gifts to his friends. I personally have received many interesting books from him. If I were able to live to be, let's say, 75, maybe I would be able to read all those books from him, just maybe. But Vlad reads books every day. In fact, he devours them. Vlad is not focused on Hebrew and Judaism only. Christianity as a whole is his field of focus. When he plunges into some study or issue, he researches it very hard and very thoroughly.
Tak on ji skutečně studuje a velice hluboce.
Based upon the biblical teaching about baptism by immersion, I made the decision to be baptized this way. The Bible explains it in such a way that the old person dies and a new person rises to life with Jesus. This is symbolized by rising from the water. On that day, when the pastor was about to start preaching, everywhere around the pond in the reeds, frogs were croaking very loudly. The noise was so loud that the pastor was not able to be heard when speaking. In that very moment, I sensed God's touch. I realized we were there not just by ourselves, but that heaven was open and we were surrounded by angels. You would have had to shout or scream to be heard. However, the pastor lifted his finger up and said, "We are here not just by ourselves. The Most High is here with us." Suddenly, there was silence. Absolute silence. It made a very deep impression on all of us. The memory is still very real even for my non-Christian parents. Some time ago, I got a phone call from my friend Vladimir. He asked me if I could give some time for some of his friends whom he had been teaching Hebrew to. That certainly got my attention. So he shared my contact details with them, and soon afterwards, 2 young ladies from his Hebrew study group gave me a call. They expressed their interest in studying the Bible. We started meeting regularly. I was really impressed by their desire to study. Thanks to their knowledge of Hebrew, they were interested in the Old Testament primarily. So we started following the footsteps of Jesus, so to speak, through the Old Testament, even though he is very much a New Testament figure. We can meet him in the Old Testament many times. Both ladies were very surprised to find that the Old Testament speaks about the founder of the Christian church many times. It testifies about Jesus Christ.
Concerning your life story, we can say that it has a happy ending, even though many times it was very dramatic and maybe unbelievable to some. The idea of evil impersonated by Satan is hardly acceptable, even for many Christians.
In this context, a statement of a stand-up comedian comes to my mind. You can disbelieve it, you can disagree with it, but that's all you can do about it. You cannot change facts and events. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.